Hi, I'm Rasheed Ogunlaru, coach, speaker, author, and I am delighted to be with the author of The Incredible Power of Staff Networks, Cherron Inko-Tariah. Now, I'm MBE. MBE, now let's not forget that. Interesting background career. You were a civil servant for many years, you're author of this book, and you've always had a passion, or for a long time had a passion and interest in staff networks.
Yeah.
They've been set up in all sorts of different fields. In the civil service, there are many, your old background field, you see them across many public sector organisations.
Yes.
And not just public sector organisations, they cover a whole range of things from LGBT groups to Black, Asian, ethnic minority staff groups and so on. I wanted us to talk a little bit about that, and I know that you've got a lot of expertise around that. What's your take, first of all, on why we've seen the growth of staff networks over the last, I don't know, 10, 15 plus years?
I think there are a number of reasons, but for me, the fundamental is that support. That's the key reason. Staff need a voice in the workplace, and the smaller the group of people are, the less of a voice they have.
I see.
And so when they encounter certain barriers, often unseen barriers, it's very difficult to navigate some of those issues when you're by yourself.
And is that why, therefore, some of the groups that we mentioned, so we're in organisations, we're groups perhaps for women, for people with disabilities, people Black and ethnic minority, staff, LGBT groups and so on. So it might be groups who actually perceive that the voice is little, that the actual numbers of their staff, or visibly the numbers of their staff are small, where therefore there is a need for them to have a voice or to have support or to have an opportunity to explore.
Yeah, absolutely. There is something about testing, you know, when we go through situations at work, we don't want to feel like, oh, are we being oversensitive?
Yeah.
Or is this something that happens to other people? And sometimes having that assurance that it's not you, there is a problem here because the same thing happened to me, can really help someone and encourage someone. But I often encourage staff networks not just to say, okay, what's the problem you're facing, but let's work together and find a way forward. So I see the staff network as, yes, offering a support, encouragement, but more importantly, or equally importantly, providing some practical tools to help overcome that. So,
Cherron, you made a really good point there about staff networks, them growing and so on. I wanted to ask a little bit about, do you feel that the era that we're in, where so many organisations face change, they face challenges, there has been for a long time, there was recession, austerity, organisations being asked to do less with more, you've seen it in the public sector, NHS, civil service areas that we both done work or work with organisations. Do you think that's pronounced why there's more of a need for the staff networks and why they've increased?
I think it certainly has shine a light on the need for this, for groups of people to come together and find a way forward, because when the pressure is on, people have a tendency to behave in a way that they wouldn't normally. And that could exhibit in a number of ways, you know, how you speak to people, your behaviour and so on, and how you handle that is not an easy thing to do. And I say that because, you know, it's finding the balance between, oh, they were a bit harsh with me, am I being sensitive, or is that, there's something about going into this group and testing the ground.
Right, and this is interesting what you're saying, because suddenly, as you were saying that, suddenly a number of the themes and the issues that staff, I guess that the thing about staff networks, they're there for staff based on the issues that staff face. And we know that some of the issues that come up time and time, isn't it, where people feel as though you've said they've been perhaps treated unfairly, perhaps there's been bullying, perhaps there's been harassment, perhaps they feel there's been prejudice, perhaps they feel as though they've been overlooked when it comes for promotion and so on. And so you're making an important point that sometimes when the pressure is on, the climate is such that it can be harder to tell, actually, is this fair, is this just happening to me? And
I think sometimes you can get so focused on you're trying to achieve your targets and achieve your goals, and when you are treated slightly unfairly, you say, well, it must be me because everyone else is progressing. And that's not necessarily the case. It's not always you. There is sometimes a problem, a culture, and it becomes even more apparent when the pressure is on. And I think staff networks can step in and say, we're seeing a pattern here, there's something not quite right, and we need to work together to fix it. More importantly, we need to highlight it to the senior managers or the change makers in the organisation,
right,
and bring about that change that's required for
and I guess in some areas that will explain the growth of particular types of staff networks. For example, there's been a big growth in Black, Asian, minority ethnic staff networks, for example, and that's an area whereby I know that you and I have both done work, for example, with the NHS, for example, and I'm sure it's very similar. You can tell us a little bit more about that and the civil service, where what we see is many organisations where the higher up the tree you look, the less diversity that you see. Yeah. Again, it's true for women in organisations too, these particular themes. So it sounds like in that environment, the need for these groups is even more pronounced. And I guess maybe that's where your book comes in, that you're mindful about people being effective. It's one thing just having a voice, but then all of a sudden, if there's real issues, we need to be really effective as a network.
Absolutely. I mean, the staff networks have been going for a very long time, and the format of a staff network in terms of people coming together has existed in organisations for years, but it's never been formalised. It's just groups of people that come together informally to have a rant or to get things off their chest.
And have a lunch.
That's lunch times and after work. Yeah. But what we have seen more and more of is this move towards a more professional outfit, shall we say? Yeah. And you're right when you talk about effective. I think it's so important for staff networks to be effective and have an impact, not just for their members, but for the organisation as a whole.
So let's get into some of those issues then, because then all of a sudden, so there's this need we've established for whatever reason, the group that we talked about, there is a need. Then all of a sudden that either that there's been a group there for a long period of time, it's well established, or there's been a realisation that we need to set up this staff network. Okay. And then there can be this is where all sorts of challenges can emerge. I'm going to just first of all ask you, what do you tend to see when you first encounter staff networks? I wonder what your experience is, because I think the first thing that kind of jumps out at me is that the more the climate is heightened, or the issues of the challenge or the austerity or what have you, the more important that network is. But therefore it puts a lot of pressure on these people who are staff. This is an additional thing to their job, where it becomes pressurised and the need for them to be effective becomes even more important. So tell me, what's your observation and what are your first tips for any staff networks that are just about to spring up or that they're already there?
My observations are so varied because depending on the organisation but what I have seen as a common thing coming through is that organisations are changing and staff networks fail to recognise that. Right. So they're still stuck to when they first started the staff network, which addressed the need at the time. Right. And it's not to say that the need is no longer there, it's just you have to have a different strategy to address the need. Right. And I find that sometimes staff networks are stuck. Right. And that leads to frustration for some people and so on. So
the magical thing presumably about that is that means that whether it's a new network or if it's been established for a long time, what you say there is then a prompt for us to think about, well, where are we now as an organisation? What's the need for the organisation and our staff now?
Absolutely. It's about doing that temperature check on a regular basis. Understand, have things really changed? Are they changing? Are we changing? It's almost doing an impact assessment on yourself as a staff network. And I think sometimes some staff networks can get a little complacent, especially if they're quite established, they've got a good reputation, they may have won an award, they may think, oh, we've arrived, and so but the problem isn't solved because people are still not progressing, they're not going through promotion, there's still harassment and bullying. So your tactics need to change. What worked 5 years ago probably won't work nowadays.
So the tactics might need to change, the issues of your membership may have changed, so there might be a number of things that are kind of going on and in the organisation, so you need to do that temperature check.
Yeah, absolutely.
Can we start off with, very briefly, before we close, I wanted to give a few tips both for those who are starting networks and for those who are established networks. And ironically, we're sat here today and I'm just about to run a workshop and there's some people who are setting up a staff network that are coming along to it. So I just want to ask, for those people who are establishing a staff network, and they recognise there is a need. What, can you give us some tips? And I'm sure that they're among the kind of tips that
there
you
are some
share
tips.
here.
There are lots of. I mean, for me, it's having the right foundation.
Right.
And when I say that, I mean, what's the reason? What's the rationale? Why do you think that what problem is the staff network going to solve? If you can identify the answer to that, it's then what's the evidence to support that? Really look for the evidence.
For that evidence saying that this is a problem, people aren't getting promotion, or people are being bullied, or this group of people are really having problems with this or that.
And once you've got that, it's about testing the waters with people who aren't necessarily in the target group. So it could be, if it's an LGBT network, it's assessing it with straight allies, as they call them. If it's a BME, maybe with white colleagues, and so on. You get the gist. It's about testing the waters. This is what we want to do. And the reason why I think that's so important...
Yeah, because some people might be surprised by that, thinking, well, hang on, the need is here. For me, we're a women's group, we're an LGBT group,
Absolutely.
we're a Black Nation minority.
But the staff network will not be able to solve the problem by itself.
Right.
It will need allies across the organisation to help them achieve the mission that they want.
Including often then the support or the buy-in, or making sure that management or leadership buy into what they're about and recognise them.
And that leads me on to the next point, is what's the bottom line?
Right.
If the organisation fails to address the issues that you've raised, what's the impact on the bottom line? Now, a bottom line will mean different things to different organisations. It could be that monetary bottom line, the financial implications. For the NHS, it's about patient care.
Yes.
If you do not improve outcomes for certain members of staff, certain groups of staff, the impact on patient care is devastating.
Right.
For the civil service, it's about delivering those public services will be hindered. So think through what is the bottom line.
Yeah, really good points.
Yeah, absolutely. And then begin to put in place your terms of reference.
Yes.
How are you going to operate? What's the blueprint? What's the game plan, as I call it?
Yeah.
And then think about the teams and the players.
Right.
There's lots of players involved, not just those leading, but the members, the critical friends, your champion, what's that relationship going to look like, and as well as the community at large that you're serving.
Right. And that's where I'd imagine in terms of reference and exploring all these things, there's lots of things to consider there, because I'd imagine that sometimes, okay, what's the structure that we need? How are we going to fit in with the organisation? Are we going to be independent, semi-independent? What's the relationships we want to have with leadership, management, and all of those things? And I'd imagine that the right answer will vary depending from organisation to organisation, from need to need.
Yes, it will do. But the key point here is that whatever it is you want to do, ensure that your goals, your mission or whatever dovetails with the direction of the organisation. It's pointless if the organisation is going this way and you are going the other way. It just won't work.
It's not going to work.
No, it's
because
about aligning your work.
Exactly.
And that's the important point. What staff networks do are really important, but first and foremost, your employees. You are employees first. And I think sometimes people, they see themselves as this satellite group, a pressure group, and I don't think that's helpful.
I think that's such a very powerful point. I'm so glad, Cherron, you made that point. With that, I guess that the point is that also is then really, there's a number of things that are obviously important. Of course, in the menu of things that you're doing is apt for the group that it is that you're serving. But I think there's something about the thing that you touched on already, that kind of partnership. There may be all sorts of different organisations or people within the organisation who can help you to achieve that, or who have got similarly unions, there might be HR, there may be learning and development. So what you're wanting presumably is develop strong, rich relationships with them, so that they can see you as an ally, and all sorts of things can happen, and you should be working collaboratively.
Yes, I think that's fundamental, but also it's about being this trusted source of information. You are representing the collective voice of a minority group who are employed by that organisation. What you say needs to be powerful, it needs to be evidence-based, it needs to be practical, and offer solutions. So when people come to you and say, we're thinking of doing this, what do you think the impact could be? Then think through what that looks like.
I just want to touch on before we close, because I've got a workshop to run as well, isn't it? But what I'm so excited about this, and one of the things that strikes me is that, and I know you touch on this point, is that your terms of reference and all the evidence, the things that you pointed to gathering, will then point to, let's face it, a business case.
Yes.
And I guess that it's really important to have that business case, because I guess there might be a number of things that you need to look at. How is it going to be resourced? Is funding necessary? Can the group within itself do that? People might need things like time off, and what are the skills and so on for the people within the group or the people who are leading it that need to run, because they're going to need to, especially if it's a challenging environment, be skilled, isn't it? I mean, I spend a lot of time kind of coaching and mentoring people to make sure that they're ready for that, because it can be a challenging environment. Anything you want to say about that whole soup full of issues there, Cherron?
Wow, I would say, firstly, that leading, chairing, call it what you will, a staff network is like no other role. I'm telling you. Yeah. But it's great because you learn you learn lots of skills, you learn about yourself and so on. So let me just get that out there. There's two things. For staff networks, I would say that they have an important role to play. And it's not about individuals, it's about the collection, the collective, I should say. And that's so important. Let's park egos and let's focus on the issues at hand and finding solutions to those.
If we could only do that, we'd solve so many problems with organisations.
Yeah, I know. And I would say to organisations that, if you have staff networks or you're thinking about staff networks, in any other area of the business, you will consider what resources are needed and what the outcome is you're looking for, and what capacity and skills are required for the people in that area. And I'm saying the same is required for staff networks. If you believe that they can help solve issues in your organisation, then invest in them. And that, I don't mean throwing a large budget at them or anything like that. I'm talking about investing in their capacity, thinking through the resources, think a little bit creatively about what they need and how you can help them.
I really like
so there's
that
two, I think there's roles for both the corporate as well as the staff networks. It's about those at the top, those really at the grassroots, coming together to solve those key issues that are real in the organisation.
I really like that, because I think then there can be so many opportunities, aren't there? There's a talent, let's say there's a talent plan, a development plan, there's this and that. You therefore have, as you've you pointed to, that therefore this resource of women, LGBT staff, whatever the group is, staff with disabilities and so on, and you realise that the targets and that you've got talent within this particular group, whatever that group is, that you can be utilising this kind of network for within that whole programme. So there's a real opportunity, isn't it?
There is.
I guess, just before we close, I just want to touch on a couple of things. I want to ask you a little bit about things that you would like to see that the great staff network of today or tomorrow would be doing. But I also want to ask a little bit about, I guess one of the challenges that can emerge is this thing about where people who aren't that target group kind of sometimes feel left out. Presumably that's why you mentioned get the soundings out from people who aren't that target group. So for example, if we're black and Asian minority staff and people who are not black Asian minority staff from a disability staff group or a women's group and the men are feeling left out, is that one of the reasons why you say to get that soundings, you can make that case to why this group exists in the first place?
Absolutely, and it's often the group of people who really don't really understand what staff networks are. That's where people can face a lot of turbulence. If they're in the middle management grade, they want time off to go to a meeting. If the manager doesn't really understand why, then they're not going to be very forthcoming and saying, they're going to be focused on the day job. And I think the message there for those type of managers or for people who don't really understand, it's about if you believe that your organisation should be a fair one, should one, where there's justice, let's call it justice, that's what we're talking about here, and there should be equity, then staff networks can help bridge the gap between the rhetoric and the reality.
I like that.
And it's about ensuring that it's hearts and minds, it's understanding it. Maybe if you remove the word black and Asian and put something else in there, they may understand what you're talking about. Some women's network talk about how do you get the male allies on board and just say, well, think about the women in your life. Imagine if they were going through some of the situations that female employers go through here. How would you react to that? What would you do to change that? So it's about turning the thing around so they can understand things. I'm not saying that's the answer or that will always work, but it's thinking differently about how to convey those key messages to those people who would never actually encounter that themselves. They walk in a, shall we call it a privilege, and it's not their fault, this is not blame or anything, but it's about thinking through and helping them to understand what it's like to be an employee of a certain minority group at that time.
That's such a powerful point. Just then, as we close, what are the kind of things that you would like to see? You may have already seen this in some staff networks, effective staff networks of tomorrow doing or being, because your background, am I right, your original background, part of it was in around human resources and
Yes.
people development. So what would you, both in terms of the work that you do now as a coach, as somebody who's a specialist consultant with staff networks, and given your background within organisations, what is it that you'd like to see the effective staff networks of today and tomorrow doing?
I think that's a big question. It's huge. So I think
That's all, I love asking those kind of questions.
I think for me, what comes to mind immediately are a few things.
Yeah.
Number one, it's staff networks helping organisations to be those real drivers of diversity.
Right.
So really driving through diversity, not just paying lip service, but when you look across the levels of the organisation, from the most senior to the most junior, you're seeing diversity across the piece. The second thing is being inclusive by instinct. So you're automatically thinking through, how is this going to impact on certain groups of people?
Yes.
You may not know the answers, but use your staff networks to do that.
Right.
And I think there's something around being generous in grace, how you treat people, showing some compassion. I think staff networks, when they are effective, and when you have a receptive organisation, those type of things come together.
I get what
and
you're
it
saying.
unearths talent, it really boosts the productivity, it really creates, cultivates a culture where people want to work for you.
Right.
That's what you want. You want the best to come and work for you.
Yeah.
And if the best doesn't look like your board members, if they're put off because they cannot see a diverse board membership, they cannot see a diverse workforce, then you're missing out on the best.
That's wonderful. I think that's a wonderful point to leave it on. Cherron, thank you very much. People are trying to find you. What's the best place for you to find you and to find the Incredible Power Staff Networks?
Well, to find me, go to my website, www.thepowerofstaffnetworks.co.uk, and you can purchase the book from there. If you like the e-version of a book or a Kindle, it's also on Amazon, Waterstones. But yeah, go to the website, lots of information. We have a newsletter, so feel free to subscribe to the newsletter, Power News. And yeah, we're there to serve and help staff networks be effective.
Wonderful. So there's also consultancy work and advice. And
absolutely,
et cetera.
yes. We do coaching. We help staff networks who are from, at the embryonic stage. We help, the HR team, equality and diversity team, understand how to work more effectively with their staff networks. Whole range of activities.
Brilliant. Well,
so
it's been a pleasure.
Get in touch.
Been a real pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.